Hi and hello students, welcome to Scholar IAS current affair classes. Hope you're all set. Let's get into the class. The first article is on development finance institution. So this is an article related to your GS3 economic development, and this is an article from LiveMint. Okay, so why it is in news? This is in news to actually suggest a measure. This is suggested as a measure to tackle the infrastructure financing of infrastructure deficits. So India needs a National Development Finance Institute to improve the financing for long-term infrastructure projects. So what would be the function of such a development finance institution? So it will be actually mandated to prioritize positive development outcomes as well as balance that such developmental outcomes with profit maximization. So basically what they are trying to say is an investment that would go into a project that would promote development at the same time would be profitable. So that is what the mandate of DFI would be. And if such DFI would be actually involved in financing activities that is a type of public good. Let's say it can be a bridge or building of roadways or railways or any other infrastructure project that would actually bring in development in the country, not just growth. That's what it is trying to do. And this is not a profitable project. These projects may not be profitable from the standpoint of a risk return perspective. So any project that a company or any organization that it would be investing, they would be looking at the risk return. They would be trying to look the returns from risk perspective. When they do that, when they invest in such public good, there may not be good profits. So that's why the government has to do it, because the private sector might not be inclined to invest in such projects. And these kind of projects basically would be like environmental projects or long gestation greenfield infrastructure projects, like as I said, like railways and roadways and everything, and also innovative startups. So these are the areas, these are the broad areas where this DFI would be mandated to actually promote investment. So where will this DFI actually get fund from? So for this DFI to fund someone, it should get some fund, right? So how will this DFI gather sources? So there are two ways basically. One is the equity capital and next is debt funding. This is a broader, I mean, you would have already known, if you have exposed to economy, you would have known that equity and debt funding are the two ways to fund anything. And in debt funding, it specifically says it should be 100% owned by the government. I told you that it's going to be a public good. Whatever investment that would go into, it would be a public good. So DFIs has to be owned by the government itself. Only then it would not have a profit maximization perspective. Rather, it would be focused on the development. And also, it would be, just because it is 100% owned, it would be able to raise funds at competitive rates from the capital market. That is also a reason why it should be owned by the government wholly. This DFI could actually issue instruments like perpetual bonds and even long-term subordinate debt to raise capital base. The reason why these instruments are used is these are a type of quasi-equity instrument because they qualify as an equity due to the loss absorption capabilities. So what happens if anyone who invests in such projects, if any loss happens, everyone becomes an investor. So they cannot ask for reimbursement of money. So that's what this equity is about. And the second way is debt funding. So in debt funding, the funds can be raised by issuing bonds, and these bonds can be issued in domestic as well as international markets. So to attract in domestic market, for these bonds to have attraction, there is one way to promote it is by RBI's recognition of these bonds as highly liquid instruments, so that once this recognition is given, the commercial banks, the scheduled commercial banks, which are supposed to hold this SLR and CL liquidity coverage ratio, they would be holding this bonds, so that they can invest in these bonds and retain these bonds in these ratios to maintain these ratios. And at international level, the DFI can issue issue bonds like masala bonds or external commercial borrowings, or it can be even foreign currency convertible bonds. So these are just options that are available for. Even the another option is for DFI to receive funds directly from the multilateral development banks like NDB or AIIB or ADB. So when this happens, when the DFI directly is in touch with the multilateral banks, they could be able to receive loans at very low cost, so that they also able to lend to infrastructure at a reasonable price. Okay, and why does this, if we are going to bring about a DFI, it needs regulation, and why does that regulation is required? That's where we have to look at some aspects. One suggestion around this is the national DFI can be brought under RBI's regulation, but this is just a suggestion. But why do we need it? It's because of the risk management that is involved. Because these development banks are nothing different from a scheduled commercial bank, because its capital levels also get affected by economic cycle. Because if, let's say, tomorrow, we know right now many issues that are associated with infrastructure project are getting affected because of the economic cycle that is happening. Let's say that it can be recession, or because of this COVID, how economy is affected, it also affects the infrastructure project. Also, in addition to this, there are certain legal issues that the infrastructure projects face. So there are multiple challenges that an infrastructure projects face. So when DFI that would be involved in such projects, they would also get affected from such issues. So from risk management perspective, the regulation of DFI is important. Also, the mandate and operating model of DFI also requires regulation and supervision, because these DFIs would be exposed to a small section of sector, and such exposure would be also large. So what happens? A narrow base with large exposure is highly risky, and when such risky business is involved, there needs to be a regulation. So that's why we need DFIs needs to be regulated if that is brought into picture. Moreover, DFIs are similar to AIFIs, that is All India Financial Institutions like NABARD, NHB, SIDBI, these things. So they are similar in certain aspects. One is the ownership structure that it would be evolving into, and the next is risk profile that it would be having. As I said, the exposure that it would have is highly risk invested. So these are similar to AIFIs, and in terms of AIFIs, they have a higher minimum leverage ratio than the scheduled commercial banks itself. So this points to the fact that they have to be treated in a similar fashion like AIFIs. So and next is, if despite having all such measures into place, there has to be a question: why do we need such an elaborate mechanism when we already have a banking system in place that is already funding the projects? That should be a question. But the reason to have such a totally differentiated banking for infrastructure funding, there are few reasons. One is, despite regulatory limits, whatever limits that would be imposed if a DFI is brought in, combining this equity and debt sources actually would facilitate DFI to finance medium and long-term infrastructure projects. Right now, it's been difficult for the existing scheduled commercial banks, whether it is private or the public. There is a sort of, it turns into investment into infrastructure turns into a NPA for many banks. If the loans are granted to a company that are involved in infrastructure projects, it turns into an NPA for them, and it turns into a bad loan. So these kind of issues are associated with banking, and banks are also not so inclined towards funding these projects. So this necessitates a DFI, and also such DFI has the potential to finance almost 15 times for every rupee of equity infusion from government. So basically, if government tries to invest 1 rupee, this DFI would be able to invest 15 rupees for each such rupee. So that is the potential of DFI. In addition to that, this National Development Finance Institution would even be able to support in achieving the national infrastructure pipeline targets, so that it actually is facilitating the existing infrastructure projects itself, so that by establishing a DFI altogether, India would be able to bridge the financing gap in the infrastructure arena. So this is why the DFI is required. The need for DFI is felt. So students, this is all about DFI article. You cannot expect a direct question on this, but this is a potential question in a sense. This can be used as a reference in many of your questions. A question on infrastructure project in GS3 paper, you can use these as a suggestions if there is a question asking you why there is there is a gap in financing for infrastructure projects. This is a valid solution that you can add to your answer. The second article is on POSCO Act. So POSCO is nothing but Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. Okay, so this is in news because of a judgment that was given by Bombay High Court, in which the Supreme Court has actually stayed that order. In this Bombay High Court's decision, it has acquitted a man of sexual assault on the grounds that the underage victim was clothed during the assault. Though the reasoning sounds bizarre, we have to see why such decision has actually been taken, and that this such decision by Supreme Court also has a negative impact, because it sets a negative precedent for the conditions, as the condition of children clothed during the assault would be treated in different ways in the upcoming cases in future. So this is not a right precedent, but at the same time the reasoning that was given by the High Court was that there was no direct skin to skin contact during the assault, so it cannot be brought under POSCO Act. That was the reasoning that has been given. But let's try to understand why such sort of reasoning is actually happening, why such reasoning is being given for such a sensitive issue. Let's try to understand that. First, we need to see about the POSCO Act to understand this issue. This was actually enacted, POSCO Act was actually enacted in 2012, and that too after lot of protest and demand from the child rights organizations. And though this act came into picture, this decision came into picture, the number of cases filed under this act increased, but still conviction rate remains low. So basically what happens, the cases are increasing, the registration of cases are increasing, but the conviction rates are remaining low. So what are the reasons for such sort of low conviction rates? First thing is a lack of training and empathy. So lack of training in the sense the police and the legal system are not equipped enough to deal with such child victims. And also in number of cases the offenders are related to the child. So what happens is this sort of family relations, in such cases they try to solve amicably, though the the victim would not be compensated properly or the justice would not be given to the child. This amicable way of reaching solution would be approached by the family itself. And also there is lack of infrastructure and personnel to deal with such cases. So we know that already the existing system, police system itself is burdened with more cases, we know that, and even the legal system is burdened with more cases. And in addition to this, to deal with such child victims in a more sensitive way, we do not have the personnel or the infrastructure to deal with it. And next is the consequence of mandatory minimum sentence. This is very important. I will explain you here. So this POSCO Act has a minimum sentence criteria. So based on this, the judges do not have the discretion to pronounce sentences lower than that is laid down by the law. So what happens, any judge that is dealing with any case that is dealt under POXO, they have to give a minimum sentence as prescribed by this act. So what happens is, in many cases the judges would feel that the sentence is disproportionate to the crime. So what happens, even though it's a crime, the judge would feel that such a sentence is too harsh for that particular crime. It can be a lifetime sentence, or it can be and death penalty, no matter what, but the judge feels that it is too harsh for the crime that has been committed. So in such cases, the judge themselves might be reluctant to find the accused guilty. So even though there could be possible evidence to show that the person is guilty, but just because the punishment that is given is too harsh, the judge would reluct to find the accused guilty. And so this says that tougher punishment and harsher punishments actually is going against the aims of justice itself. While the judge cannot be blamed for this, the reason, justice reasoning that judge's reasoning is totally different from the law's reasoning. The law is political, has political intentions to get a popular support, but in the sense it defeats the purpose of justice itself. So the focus, instead of focusing on harsher punishments, the focus should be on fixing the process of punishment itself. So when we say process of punishment, the conviction rates has to increase. We have to figure out that thing, and also the cultural narrative that is associated with sexual violence against children. So even now there is a cultural narrative to it. If a girl is not modest in the way that society defines a girl, then it is this is a cultural narrative that comes into picture, and this puts women into a position where they are exposed to assault or crime or any other sexual violence. So this is about POSCO Act, students. So that's all for today's class. Till next class, happy learning. See you. Bye bye.